Hey guys, I'm Matt Brown. I am with the Accurate Perspective team. Today, this is episode 10, and we have a great guest with us today. It's Jim Walsh, state representative. And Jim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh yeah, no worries. Pleasure. That intro music really blasted through on the speakers on my laptop. You guys have your tech all down here.
We like to wake people up. You know, they first start that podcast. I'm like, if you watch your volume, it's going to hit you. Well, today's episode, we're going to talk about really schools. We have a lot of parents right now. We're going into we're only a couple weeks away from school starting back up in the public school system. And, you know, here in Yakima, it's been a hot debate of bathrooms. That's been a huge topic of concern. Curriculum has been a topic of concern. And then also just results. Results have been, or outcomes of their students have been horrible. Dave actually did a article on our local schools here, and it's been just terrible. Jim, what in the last legislative cycle, what happened? Did the legislator do anything with schools of note?
Well, sure. We always do. We fiddle with sometimes the small details of K-12 policy, sometimes the big ones. And if it ain't broke, sometimes we fix it anyway, which only makes for more trouble down the road, usually. We can talk about a few things. I would say the issues I hear about from my constituents, which I think are probably similar to what you hear about there in Yakima, is probably in this order: curriculum, masking, and whether that's out there to be re-upped, and money, and those are the things that parents are concerned about. Lying behind that is the whole issue of the parents' and families' roles in general in helping administer our K-12 public schools. But those are the three specific points. And what we did the last session in Olympia on the three was not good. On the curriculum front, we've been trying for a while, working out of the minority in the House, to get some greater curriculum transparency into policy, into law. And we've had this debate each session the last 3 or 4 years. It's always an interesting, good debate, rigorous debate, and then nothing happens. The speaker puts her thumb down on anything actually moving forward. So we had a couple of bills that would have really encouraged or even required the 295 approximately school districts around the state to post their curriculum, K-12 curriculum, all subjects, in a public venue, either online or have it available on request in paper at their offices for anyone to see. Parents, family members, concerned taxpayers, anybody could come see the curriculum. We have the potential for some bipartisan support for this kind of thing, some people coming across the aisle. So it's not a straight Republican-Democrat issue. But I would say there is pressure on our Democrat colleagues to not end up supporting transparency in curriculum. And they end up with a bunch of excuses about it. But basically, they have constituencies, they have interest groups who are loyal to their side that don't like the idea of transparency. They look at it as a questioning or a lack of support for teachers and administrators. And of course, that's not what it is. So there's that. On the masking front, we tried to get a statement in public policy. Well, mostly we tried to get a limit on the governor's emergency powers, since most of the masking in our state is flowing directly or indirectly out of the governor's office. And of course, we were not successful in getting the limit on the emergency powers. As anybody watching the show will know, or should know, it's kind of a passive-aggressive system we have for how these masking requirements are put into policy. Generally, what happens is the governor himself does not make a masking requirement. He does not use his emergency proclamations or powers to do that directly. What he has is his State Department of Health, which the governor controls. The Secretary of Health at the state level is appointed by the governor. And he has his State Department of Health come out with these guidelines, suggestions, rules about kids wearing masks. The question then becomes, what enforcement ability does the State Department of Health have to force a school or a teacher or anyone to make kids wear masks? And the truth is, in the law, they don't have the power to enforce that. All they have the power to do is suggest. Now comes here into the equation the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. In our state, that is a separately elected statewide position, separate of the governor. And the current holder of that office, a fellow called Chris Reichtel, has really tried to act like a tyrant in this space, making what he calls an emergency rule, which as the head of a bureaucratic agency, he's allowed to do. But thinking that he can make an emergency rule telling school districts, if you don't do what the governor's office says, we're going to cut your money. And that's very controversial because he doesn't have the ability to do that, in short, but he's trying to do it anyway. So then what you get is all of this hubbub going on in Olympia between the governor and the State Department of Health and the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. And the local school boards get very intimidated. They'll tell you, well, we don't know what we need to do, but we're afraid of losing our money. We're afraid of losing the financial support from the state. So we're going to, we think it's the most judicious thing to do what they suggest, which is make kids wear masks. So what we tried to do at current, by the way, most schools are not doing that in Washington. What we tried to do last session was get some clarity in the law about who can do what, and that basically school districts are independently elected, independent entities that can make their own decisions about these things and don't have to do what teacher says, as the story goes. So, but we weren't successful in doing that either. And then on the last bit on the money front, the most controversial thing we did in Olympia was we extended a policy of not adjusting the allocation monies available, operating monies available to school districts from the state to reflect the true enrollment at school districts. This is a thing we started in 2019 or 2020 rather, but it uses 2019 enrollment numbers and says that schools will get their operating allocation monies based on their 2019 enrollments, not whatever their current enrollment is. And the theory there was to protect schools from being disproportionately hurt by COVID unenrollment. I've not supported this plan at any point, but I sort of understand the logic of that. That worked for a couple of years, but now we're several years out. And some of my colleagues in Olympia want to keep extending this hold where allocation monies are still based on 2019 enrollment. And we're at a place now where enrollment numbers are down almost across the board, almost at every school district in the state. But it's not because of COVID. It's because of item number one, our curriculum issues. Right. And so they're trying to sort of play this off as still a COVID issue, but it's not. It's that families are unhappy with curriculum and they're pulling their kids out of schools. And so we need to get back to where those allocation monies, the operating money available from the state to the school districts, reflects the actual enrollment at that time, in real time, at the school district.
So, I mean, talking about the curriculum piece, I mean, I thought that was interesting. I didn't realize you couldn't get that curriculum now.
Well, each district handles its own way. Some voluntarily put their curricula up for people to see publicly, but that's like a handful. Most will make it available on request. Some will not make it available. So what the bill would have done was formally said all districts have to make it available publicly. So you don't have to make a special request to get the curriculum. In most school districts, a parent has to do a public records request to see curriculum details. And most school districts will comply with those if asked. A few won't. But most will comply if asked. But you have to ask. And I think that's too much. It ought to just be public.
It's interesting because in Yakima and West Valley, we have had the gender inclusive bathroom debate recently in our West Valley School District. They voted to make bathrooms gender inclusive, right? And a bunch of the parents decided, well, that's it for me. We're pulling our kids out. And I know there was between 20 and 30 families that I know that actually just pulled their kids out of that school. And there's probably a lot more than that. But during that, I sent a letter actually to the West Valley School District school board asking them basically, what are you going to do to protect our daughters from, bad things happening to them in bathrooms, to put it as PG as I can put it on this show. And their response to me, it was kind of shocking. I only heard from one school board member, but his response was, well, are you going to fund our schools, Matt, if we don't do this? Not how he's going to protect my child, not how any of the, the girls that are out in that school district are going to be safe. No, Matt, how are you as the city going to fund our school district when we don't do this and OSPI pulls our funding? And I thought, wow, like what an interesting response back to me, but also we're supposed to have local control. We're supposed to have local control over our schools. And, some of Lindsay and I talked on Sunday with a candidate to be for Senate. And it's interesting to see, like, a lot of folks don't realize how much our school boards right now are just passing the buck off to the state, going, they're not upholding their role, but at the same time, they're being told, well, we can't do this or we're going to lose funding. And you just mentioned that's not true, but how can we convince them that's not true?
It's tough. School board members, called technically school board directors in most places, when you're elected to the school board locally, you join an association called WASDA. That's the acronym, Washington School Board Directors Association. And WASDA has a kind of boot camp for newly elected school board members. And this boot camp really instills in school board members that they have to do what they're told. What it does is it emphasizes some state law, which is true, that in certain circumstances of, really egregious bad action on the part of individual school board members, a school board member can be held personally liable, financially and legally liable for actions of the school board. Now, that is in law, but the law there is meant for really extraordinary kind of negligent type situations of bad action. In most situations, an individual school board member is not held personally liable for the actions of the board. Most school districts carry insurance for their directors, the school board members. So if something does go wrong and there's a lawsuit, they have coverage for the cost of defending the board and for any judgments that there might be. So the situation where an individual school board member is held personally liable for something that the school district does is very rare, very, very rare. But they really instill in the new members this risk. So the members become very risk averse, very timid, and they're afraid constantly of money issues, that if they do anything that would imperil the flow of money from the state to the school district, that they would be held personally liable for this. And then it infuses a rhetoric. And that's what you had, Matt, where they'll say to you, well, are you personally going to pay for the price of this? Well, no, of course I'm not. That's, I mean, I am already.
Right. Technically, I am.
But no, what a silly response. No, the school board needs to make the best policy decisions for the kids and the families in the area. And to say something like that is just the rhetoric that they use of this, well, you're on the hook for this if you make a mistake. No. Maybe we need to unpack this all the way. Remember, when you pay your property taxes, some of your property taxes stays local, goes directly to the county or to the school district directly. And that's a big chunk of how they operate. Some of it goes to Olympia, and it gets put in a big pot and swirled around and then sent back again to the school district. So the school district's getting some of its money directly from your taxes, but a big chunk of the money they're getting that gets sent to Olympia and then back to them again. That's not great, because like any government system of payments, there are strings attached. And what we're talking about here, whether it's masking requirements or curriculum requirements or the comprehensive sex ed curriculum, the state will use that money to coerce actions on the part of the school board, in any school board. Oh, my clock is chiming in the background here.
Jim's got
so that's what you're seeing, a combination of this training that any school board director, school board member who makes a mistake is going to get sued and lose his or her house, combined with this kind of red tape, strings attached bullying from the governor or from the superintendent in Olympia. It gets to this situation where the school boards act timidly. In fact, under the letter of the law, both RCW and the Washington Administrative Code, the school board has power, broad power and independence to make policy decisions. And the description in code, in law, of the school board's power is equal to or greater than the relevant governor power. So the school board is as strong as the governor in terms of determining how it's going to operate its schools and its policies, bathrooms or otherwise. They are free to set their own policies. And we need to remind them of that, I think.
Jim, I have a question for you. I was talking to a superintendent locally, and West Valley had a whole bunch of attention over these gender-inclusive bathrooms and locker rooms. And this superintendent told me it's statewide. It doesn't really matter what anyone votes on, because statewide we have to, otherwise we'll lose funding. So in that regard, would the school board, even if they decided to go against this gender inclusive, do they even have a chance? Or would it go to the superintendent of West Valley and it wouldn't matter? Is it just like smoke and mirrors that we think we have a chance to get rid of this gender inclusive bathroom situation?
No, it's not. The superintendent isn't the boss of the school board. The superintendent works for the school board. If the school board wants to take a vote and not have a policy, bathrooms or otherwise, and the superintendent tries to countermand that, they can fire the superintendent for cause. No, but this gets back to some of that boot camp training I'm talking about, where aside from being trained to think that they're going to get personally sued for bad actions, they are also trained to listen to the superintendent and do what the superintendent tells you. Now, there are analogies to this in corporate America, where corporate boards end up being kind of subordinate to a powerful CEO of a company. But in truth, in the law, the corporate board is supposed to be in charge of how the corporation operates. And some companies have strong boards, some companies have weak ones. And analogously, some school districts have strong boards and some have weak ones. And the weak ones will defer to the superintendent too much and not look out for kids and for families as much as they should. So no, it's not smoke and mirrors. And the whole thing is we'll lose funding. We just got through a few years ago in Olympia, the McClary decision. And in the course of doing that, got into the mechanics of how those allocation monies and other monies are sent from the state down to the school districts. But we revisited a lot of the constitutional language in our state constitution about schools and how they operate and what the state is obligated to do. For the state to threaten to cut off money because of a disobedient school board, and the governor and the superintendent of public instruction, Reichel, have both used that rhetoric, disobedient, runs against the state constitution's charge that the state government's paramount duty is to provide a universal, high-quality basic education to every child in the state. So they can huff and puff, Inslee and Reichel, about cutting money to school districts, but when it comes to it, they can't do that.
Mm.
Hey, Jim, all this talk about funding in schools, the thing that's most frustrating to me is it feels like underneath all of it, the education bureaucrats, the Democrats, the school administrators think they're owed all this money. And my question to them, number one, is what have you done so far to earn the money? When I'm seeing competency rates in the 30 percentiles and graduation rates in the 95 percentiles, listen, I was educated in a Philadelphia public school. I'm not great at math, but those two numbers do not add up. Something is wrong. And so with that, I always look for solutions. House Bill 1633 is yours, and I think that's a great solution and a great stepping stone towards what we should be working towards, which is Arizona's school choice bill. So could you tell us a little bit about House Bill 1633, how that helps families? I'm a huge proponent of it. I believe that if I can pick where I spend my money at for groceries, I should be able to spend my money where I want it for my kids' education.
All true, and be careful. Inslee and some of his supporters don't want you to choose where you buy your groceries, so let's not let them go down that angle. Sure, 1633 is it's a school choice policy bill for our state. Now, Washington has a bunch of particular language in its constitution and its law. I mentioned some already just a moment ago that make our system of funding schools a little different than others. I mean, every state does it its own way. The way we do it makes a true voucher system, which is what some states are at least experimenting with, hard to pull off. So 1633 isn't what I would call a voucher system. It doesn't create that, but it creates something like a voucher system. And it allows a certain number of families, at least initially, to apply for and receive a $10,000 a year scholarship. The mechanic of it is it's a scholarship. And the scholarship is funded by the kind of allocation of money we talked about that schools get to operate. Currently, the amount of state money that most school districts get is in the $18,000 per student per year range. The details get a little hard to calculate because of various funding factors, but it's about $18,000 a year. So what this program would do, it would take $10,000 of that $18,000 and make that available to the family. Family would get a scholarship, essentially like a voucher in other states, and could take that $10,000 wherever they wanted to pay for a year of school for their child. This could be another public school out of their geographic area. It could be a private school, a Christian school, or a Catholic school. It could be a charter school, which we've experimented with in a very small way here in the state. But a charter school is legally a public school that has some attributes of a private school. And in the way I drafted 1633, the $10,000 a year could even be used for homeschooling supplies. However, the homeschoolers got very active and were not happy about that part of the bill. So when I reintroduce it, I will either limit or remove that part. But the idea is it would give a family $10,000 a year with which they could go to any number of schooling options, online, in person, religious affiliated, not religious affiliated, charter, traditional public, and send their kids to those places for that amount. And it would begin a process. It's not as broad, of course, a plan as Arizona's put into place, but it would be a transitional step. It would be a first step towards something like that.
And if you need help making eligibility wider for homeschool parents and kids, you just let me know, Jim. I'm there to help you for that. I have 4 kids who are homeschooled because of this whole situation, not just COVID, like you mentioned, but the curriculum, the responses from the local superintendent, pushing of equity, etc. So if you ever need help, you just reach out to me and I'll help you.
Oh, I will do. The trouble that some of the homeschoolers have with this is they want absolutely no interface with the state education bureaucracy. And their concern is that by even taking something like this, an opt-in optional program to take some state money, to use that state money for some of the homeschooling curriculum course expenses, they feel even that would give the state too much purview, too much of a chance to dictate what their homeschooling curriculum should be, and they want no part of it. So, but that's a conversation we'll go on to have, and we can have that down the road. For right now, I want this to be as close to something we can get through Olympia as possible, and we're going to continue to push for it.
Do you think you have support on the other side of the aisle for it?
It is controversial. The typical kind of profile and courage, and I use that term ironically, with any controversial bill is a few of my colleagues across the aisle will tell me privately they support it, but when it comes to a vote, they can't support it.
Do we even have all Republican support on that bill?
Pretty good Republican support. Yeah, even some of our more moderate members, they see the value in it and they do support it. I haven't counted it, but I would say I would get almost all of the Republican caucuses in favor. Maybe a few would drift away. I might peel off a couple of Democrat legislators, but it would be a few very brave ones. Now, if we can get more Republicans in Olympia, in the legislature, if we get control of the House, the calculus changes dramatically. Then I think we would be able to get a few more Ds to come across and support it. And we may have to let a few Rs go, but on a vote. But I haven't really whip counted it because we're just not close enough to a vote for that to be effective. But I would say there'd be a tiny bit of bipartisan support, but it'd be pretty partisan as currently configured. Go back a few years and look at how we approved charter schools, even in the limited little way we did that here. It required a great deal of whipping of votes when that did pass through, and it ended up being almost all of the Republicans in favor, and then just a handful of brave Democrats crossing over and voting yes. I think for this it would be like that, but we're going to need more supporting votes anyway before it even gets off the ground. Come
on, brave Democrats! You guys got to come to the table.
Well, there are a couple of arguments we make to their side. I mean, one is this is not done from a place of hurting public schools. I mean, the rhetoric on the far left is parental choice hurts public schools. That isn't true. I mean, public schools currently in this state and all around the country are hemorrhaging enrollment. People are leaving in significant numbers. And I believe school choice will help staunch that. It will bring some people back into the public school system, and it'll stop the exodus of families and kids out of public school systems. Also, remember those numbers. The state's allocation money averages about $18,000 per kid per year to each school district. All we're taking out is 10. So if you follow the math, there's money left on the table for the school district for a kid who's gone somewhere else to school. If a school district was smart about managing enrollment under this program, they could end up actually increasing their real per student allocation budgets as some kids left to go somewhere else with their $10,000 scholarship. It takes a lot of explaining to get that point through. And a lot of my colleagues in the legislature and quite a few school directors around the state, they run more on emotion than they do on logic or reason. And it takes explaining this multiple times for them to see. But when they do, you can see that they get it. Oh, well, there's the chance that a school district could actually end up with more money per pupil under this program. And And that's true. They might.
Just keep the focus on the
is
money,
hard
not the
sometimes.
kids.
Well, when in Rome, you have to speak the language of the Romans.
Exactly.
So switching back a little bit, you mentioned WASDA as the boot camp for these school board directors. I called it the brainwashing ceremony at City Hall when I came in. Not for WASDA, but another group. So how do we, but see, for me, it's not like something that's necessarily mandatory for me to participate in all this every single day of my life as a city council member. But for the school board director, there's no other option for them. It's not a optional thing. They must participate inside WASDA. So how do we solve that? Because maybe some of these school boards, I mean, you got a bunch of upset parents. They're like, we're gonna run for school board. We're gonna jump in, and then they get in there and they're told the same thing. Now they're having to report to WASDA, and they're going, oh, this is why they all said the same thing. How do we fix that?
Well, WASDA is a member-controlled organization. It's a bit of a strange bird in that it is recognized in state law, which is not a usual thing. Organizations like that are not usually recognized by name in state law, but WASDA is. So it has what is effectively a kind of monopoly franchise on this kind of training and the membership of school board members, as you referenced in your comment there. But it remains a member-controlled organization. So if enough reform-minded members join there, they could change the policy of the organization and make it a little more, diverse, open-minded to different perspectives. It doesn't have to be like it is. So that's kind of a strategic long march solution there. What do we need immediately? What we need immediately is school board members who are bold, and they're just willing to stand on principle and to defend their independence as locally elected officials. The hook they use at WASDA and elsewhere is the insurance. The coverage. Again, talking from private sector, corporate America, it's essentially directors and officers insurance, like a company has, D&O insurance, where the coverage protects the school board member from lawsuits or court judgments. That's the hook they use to really compel school board members to obey, is if you aren't compliant, if you don't do the training, if you don't use the forms, then we may not insure you, or the insurance may carve out a claim made against you. So ultimately, we need to find perhaps some other way to fund that coverage, or again, just have the inmates take control of the asylum at WASDA and change the organization's attitude and policy on using that director's insurance as the stick to demand compliance.
Could parents, I mean, the liability coverage, I know, like here in Yakima, our city, for example, we're part of the National League of Cities and something, blah, blah, blah. It's a long name. But they provide, I just found this out the other day, they provide insurance to the city for the sewer lines that are literally so if your house has a sewer break from the main to the house, that little stretch there, this entity covers the city's cost to go actually replace it. And I thought, what a weird thing to provide insurance for. But it's a added expense to a city, and the city then is a part of this association, and they have to kind of be a part of this group to just receive this liability coverage for a very niche thing that happens. And I think of like WASDA, and they're providing a pretty niche liability coverage for a school board director. Is there a way for them to just seek other insurance companies? Like, could they just insure themselves? I mean, people insure themselves all the time for other things. Could they not, as a school board, just say, thanks, but we're just going to go get our own insurance?
Good question. Great question. Most public entities, including your city and including the school board, are using a form of self-insurance. I mean, it's not, Liberty Mutual or Aetna or the Hartford doesn't write this insurance. Most of it is pooled. It's what they call a risk pool or an insurance pool. So it's the cities, in your case, themselves, or the school districts themselves, that all pool together their money. It is a form of self-insurance like that. Could a district or a city or any other local government say, we're going to just truly self-insure? Well, generally they could. Again, schools are a little different in that our state law specifically recognizes this one organization, WASDA, as the preferred entity for doing the training and other things, including providing the coverage.
The Geico of school boards.
So that would require some change in policy, some change in law. But the spirit of what you say, I think, is true, and what we want, which is a school board that is willing to stand up independently, strongly enough that they would say, we will risk not getting coverage from our risk pool insurance because we will not have so-called gender inclusive bathrooms, or whatever the issue is. The whole gender inclusive bathroom is a very difficult issue to unpack. Of course, you guys know it well. I mean, you even have to be careful the language you use. Gender inclusive, what does that mean?
Right.
At some point, while the school board and the school district could make accommodations for anyone, some of these, newspeak language they use, really, that could create a liability. And I mean, this probably gets to the question you talked about, Matt. I mean, they could be creating liabilities for that school district the other direction by allowing people of whatever sex to use whatever bathroom. They may be increasing the risk of an assault or a rape or something. And what do they do then? Are they going to say, well, we had to because it's statewide, gender inclusive? Well, I don't think a jury's going to care about that if there's an assault in the bathroom. And so what I put to a lot of these kind of education bureaucrats when they say things like that is, well, you're taking on different risks. You're not protecting the school board from the school district from risk. You're just switching one risk out for another risk. And they often...
And a bigger risk.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Apparently they don't read the news and have never heard of Loudoun County is it Virginia or Maryland, where there was that huge incident. And Jim, to answer your question, what would a school board do? I'd venture to guess they would do what Loudoun County School Board did and try to sweep it under the rug as to not look bad and have their agenda look bad. And that's actually my big concern. And my kids aren't even in public school.
No, I mean, it should be your concern as a taxpayer.
Yep.
If you're paying property taxes, you've got interest in the outcome. And even if your kids are being homeschooled or at a private school, I think we all have an interest in seeing, again, I want the public school districts to do well. I want them to recover from this mess that they've been caught in. And even if you never send your kids to public school, if you're a dedicated homeschooler, I'd like the public school to be a reasonable option. And maybe once or twice a year you think about it. Yep. And that would make both your homeschooling curriculum and homeschooling efforts better. And I think it would make the public school better. So nobody wants to hurt public schools here. We want to see them do well. But yeah, I mean, that Loudoun County case, I mean, that flipped the whole state. That was Virginia. And that was the whole reason the whole state changed. They changed their governor. They changed everything. Mm-hmm. And the flashpoint was that one school district. I mean, there were other factors too, but what crystallized that state's entire political reorientation was that one school district where they just acted, that the bureaucrats there, the administrators, acted horribly. and vilified families and parents, and were lying about stuff and hiding stuff that was happening, and and that whole state changed. So I sometimes caution the bureaucrats, education bureaucrats I talk to here in Washington. You be careful.
Yep.
You could flip the whole state around, and if you're not more
that'd be great.
accommodating families, yes. But I don't want trouble. I mean,
yeah,
we want that change, but I don't want failing schools as the fulcrum for change. I'm going to try to help these schools not fail now and have a fulcrum for change anyway. But we can't let the political left, and some of it's not even politically driven, some of it's just bureaucratic, stasis. We can't let those guys control the terms of debate. And we can't let those people say that we who want reform are going to hurt public schools or hurt kids or hurt teachers. I mean, one of the great things I've experienced in the last year or two are frontline teachers coming to me and saying, I can't say this publicly, but you're right. And if we could get some of these reforms in place, I think my job in the classroom would be better.
Yeah, I mean, I have a bunch of friends that are teachers, and they've heard me talk a little bit on schools around the city and different things, and they're like, "You're right, you're right." We're not going to say it out loud though, but you're right. Keep talking, and I'm like, yeah, but I also need you guys to also start talking a little bit here. The moms are out there, the dads are out there doing it. We need the teachers now to also start speaking up, because, like Yakima, we have a huge disparity amongst, our whole Yakima school district is under the poverty line in the state. But we also, like, our math, for example, in Yakima School District had 11% of kids meeting math standards. 11.
Just horrible.
And
that's not an English as a second language issue. I mean, math is universal. So, that's just inexcusable. Yeah. And
then you're talking about, kids that are, already have income disparity. They have a harder time anyways. And so I'm going, man, shouldn't we be pushing for more school choice type of options? Shouldn't we be pushing to make curriculum better? Shouldn't we be because look at Yakima schools. I mean, look at these areas where they're failing their kids. I mean, obviously it's not working this way. Maybe we have to change what we do. And it's not about trying to destroy the public school system.
Not at all. Yeah, no, the bureaucrats will tell you, well, the solution to that 11% math proficiency is we need more social and emotional learning. SEL. No, we do not need more social and emotional learning. We need more mathematics and algebra and calculus. That's what we need more of. The social and emotional learning has become the answer to every problem. And again, not so much from frontline teachers, but from the administrators, the bureaucrats. And for people who are watching and are new to these issues, in this state, we have a very dense education, K-12 education bureaucracy. We have not only the school districts, which are your local school district, and most people get that. Sitting above the school districts, we have these things called ESDs, Education Service Districts, that are kind of bigger school districts. They include multiple school districts in their portfolio. And the ESDs are where a lot of the bad policy takes place. A lot of the gender inclusive bathroom policies, a lot of the teaching SEL, social and emotional learning versus core learning skills. A lot of the curriculum development, all of this takes place at that higher level. And then, of course, above the ESDs, we have that Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, OSPI, which is one elected position like a governor, but then a whole bunch, thousands of bureaucrats who work in that office, primarily in the Olympia area, but also all around the state. So we got a lot of bureaucrats in Washington for K-12 education, and they represent the challenge to real reform. It's not so much the teachers in the classrooms. They tend to be with us who want reform. It's that bureaucracy, it's that middle level, and that's where we need rationalization, that's where we need real restructuring, and that's where also there's the most political pushback to any reform ideas out of that bureaucracy.
Man.
Yeah. I have a question for you, Jim. I'm the only one in the group who has kids in public school, middle school. And at our school, they did just introduce SEL. And then they also took away the gifted program. So 2 moves I wasn't crazy about. I love that you're working on this, but do you have advice for just moms like me or dads? You know, sometimes we're accused of domestic terrorists if we go to the school board meetings and vocalize things like, what can we do to have our kids get a good education? We're told, pull your kids out, pull your kids out. That's not an option for many of us. So do you have advice for us?
Yeah, my youngest is still in the public school system too, by the way. Most of my kids are grown and launched, but our youngest is 16, and he still goes to Aberdeen High School in Aberdeen. So I'm with you. First of all, don't give up. Don't be quiet. Be the squeaky wheel, and don't care if that makes other people angry or gives you nasty looks. I mean, this is America. You know, it's your duty as well as your right to stand up for your kids and speak loudly in their interest. So don't be browbeaten. And the bureaucrats so want to intimidate. They want, it's like, Sun Tzu, the best battle is the battle that's never fought. They're actually terrified of fighting this battle over curriculum development because they know they're going to lose. So what they want to do is they want to intimidate you and make you not be that loud person at the school board meeting. So don't give in. Be the loud person at the school board meeting. Be the pain in the neck to the school board. That is your duty to your kids. So to the point of SEL, look, there are elements of social and emotional learning that aren't bad, and that's, of course, why they use it as rhetoric. Social and emotional learning can be helpful, particularly to some special needs kids who need to learn some behavioral issues before they can really be effective students. There is a role for social and emotional learning and educating kids. The trouble is some people with agendas have kind of snuck into that body and taken control of it and made it into something that it is more and worse than it needs to be. So right now, I think any district that looks at getting rid of gifted programs and replacing it with broad social and emotional learning is making a terrible mistake in the interest of educating kids. SEL is most effective applied to specific kids, often kids with special needs, but not always, narrowly applied. SEL should not be a basket of education tools used for the entire population of kids. The origin of it is to help kids with behavioral issues basically mainstream. It's a middle step where a kid with behavioral issues, maybe some learning issues, learns some ways to be in order to go into a regular mainstream class with the general population of kids. And that's okay. That's a good thing. We want that. But to apply that kind of basket, that toolkit of education to all kids isn't really what it was meant to do. And as I said, some people with agendas, political and ideological agendas, are using it as a way. I mean, this is where we get into families worried about indoctrination versus education. And we don't want that to happen. We don't want to teach kids what to think. We want to teach kids how to think. And so we need to be very careful about that. And we know there's a political agenda behind this move to get rid of gifted programs. The argument, the political ideological argument is they are racist, they are discriminatory, they are unfair. And, There's a handful of data that suggests they've been used like that in some places, but generally gifted programs are not that. But it's a political talking point, and that's what's happened, and that's bad. For every special needs program we develop, we should develop a gifted program. It should balance out approximately. But here's where we get back to the money. There's specific money earmarked for special needs and other types of education, and there isn't as much money earmarked for gifted programs. Mm-hmm. So again, it's a money issue, not an educational strategies issue.
Follow the money. It's always the thing. That's everywhere I go. It's I mean, at the city right now, we're facing a huge budget issue facing 2024, and their answer is we just need to tax more. We need to get more taxes. And I'm sitting there going, man, that is always seems to be the solution around this state is tax or not fund this, but let's fund all the other things that cost us more money.
Well, I mentioned Reichtel, the superintendent of public instruction, separately elected of the governor statewide. He's really stepped on a couple of rakes in a row in the last few days. Just a few days ago, he came out with this. He does these media releases. I don't know what to call them. They're kind of press releases, but they're done like in a more formal way, as if they're law or something. And this is the influence of the governor with his proclamations. So Reichtel, the superintendent of schools, came out with one that said he didn't like these numbers that Dave mentioned, where 70% statewide, 70% of kids are not proficient in math, 50% are not proficient in English. So he wants to stop testing is his solution. No more testing. And this is an old debate in education policy circles. And there are some legitimate criticisms of proficiency testing and the way it's done, particularly the way it's done here in this state. There are legitimate questions about how effective it is. But in principle, there's nothing wrong with proficiency testing. And it's not only a test of the kids, it's a test of the system. How is the system serving the kids? So that opened that whole can of worms. And then Reichtel, the superintendent, tried to kind of backpedal away from that and say, oh, well, that's not what I meant. And it is what he meant because it was recorded when he said it. So there's that. But then there was a money one just recently. So Reichtel came out with this other pronouncement that he wants to change the way that some timber revenue is used. And remember, most school districts in this state, particularly the rural school districts, get some money from public timber sales. That is the harvesting of timber and sale of timber from public lands. This used to be a major element of school funding in our state. Over the last 20 years or so, we've basically destroyed it. So now it's a relatively small piece of the budget pie for schools. But he wants to redo even the small piece. And he couched it in rhetoric of, well, this will be more fair to smaller rural districts that have suffered because we're not harvesting timber like we used to off of the public timberlands specifically designed to be harvested, because that's what they are. They're working lands, they're working resources. They are not wildernesses. They are farms for trees that we cut and sell and make money to pay for our schools and other local government stuff. So we've kind of screwed that all up. So now he wants to do away with it entirely and come up with a new plan for redirecting other monies to rural schools. And it's a terrible, terrible idea. What he ought to be doing is working on fixing the mechanism of harvesting public timberland for that money. Get back to what worked. Instead, he wants to do away with it and create a kind of rural school district welfare program that has been proposed for some small counties in the past who were also negatively affected by the destroying of the public timberland sales. And if you ask anybody from these small rural counties if they got their money that they were promised to replace the timber money they weren't getting, they will tell you the state promised us money and never gave us any money. And And I'm afraid that Reichel's new proposal to do away with the timber money entirely will end up just like that again. He'll promise to give money to rural school districts instead of timber money, and then never give them the money. This is the precedent that's been set by the Department of Natural Resources to the counties that were hurt. And I think he's just trying to do that again at the school level. We got to get these people on the right track. And the right track is don't replace working assets with welfare. It doesn't work for individuals, it doesn't work for counties, and it doesn't work for school districts. Let's get that timberland working again and harvested and get that money in a more direct way back into the hands of the school districts. We don't need taxes. The timber revenue is non-tax revenue to the school districts. Let's get back to that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one about the timber. I actually just found that out probably like a month ago, was that a lot of, school districts used to be funded a lot by timber revenue. And I went, wow, what a weird thing for, especially in this state where, you don't really see us doing a whole lot of logging anymore. So
that's weird because climate change is a national emergency.
We don't get me started on this stuff. I mean, young trees eat more carbon than old trees. I never understand the environmental radicals' affection for old growth forests. If you want to get rid of carbon in the atmosphere, you want young growing trees. They consume more carbon than old trees do. If you're going to follow their logic of carbon outputs, you'd want to be harvesting all the old growth and plant new trees there that are growing and consuming more carbon. But intellectual consistency is not their strength.
Lindsay and Dave, you guys have any other questions? We're going to wrap up. We've already been going for 57 minutes. So you guys have anything else for this?
We'll just have to have them on again. It doesn't feel like 57 minutes.
I know. Jim, you're awesome, man. It's fun having you on here.
No, listen, you guys are doing a great job. I mean, these are the conversations we want. Lindsay, don't let them browbeat you. You be that squeaky wheel for your kids. And who cares? So you don't get invited out to lunch. Who cares? I mean,
Thanks, Jim.
This is
Nice.
this is what our system is supposed to be. I mean, it's a grassroots up system of government and schools. And let's not let the top try to dictate from on high. It never works well.
And, you mentioned earlier, like even the taxpayers, man, like that was one thing when I went out to a school board meeting before I was elected. I went out and talked because a bunch of parents wanted me out there. And the school district actually said, why the heck are you here? You don't even have kids here. And I said, but my tax money pays for this place.
Yeah.
So I'm a tax.
That's not your money, Matt. That's their money. How dare you?
So, and actually it's quite a lot in Yakima County of our property tax goes to schooling, almost close to 60% in some areas.
And that's not a bad thing. I mean,
right.
I'm a fiscal hawk like no other, but what is a good use of tax resources? Sure, basic ed is a good use for that. But we're just screwing up how we implement that money.
Yep.
Right. Well, we're losing basic ed. So
it's still there in the Constitution. It's just not always there in the classroom.
Right. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to talk a little bit about our show sponsors. 2 show sponsors. One is Mac Daddy Coffee Roasters. If you guys need a good cup of joe, go down to Yakima Avenue and First Street, and they are right there on the corner, and they are great. Just tell them that we sent you. The other show sponsor is Center for Self-Governance. They are the political leadership training that we recommend. All of us have taken 1 or 2 or a lot of these different courses, and we highly recommend if you're trying to get involved or be that squeaky wheel like Lindsay at your school board, learn what that means, how to actually be an effective squeaky wheel. So centerforselfgovernance.com. And you guys can follow us on many places, but one of those to help donate to the show is on Patreon, patreon.com/accurate perspective. Helps keep us going, keep us connecting to you guys and writing fun articles and all that fun stuff. And then also every now and then you get to have a fun lunch with one of us if you get to the bigger tier of the Patreon. So so help us do that, or follow us on, all the podcast places. You can find us on Apple, Google, Spotify. I mean, you just name it. We're there. You'll see articles on our blog from Dave and Lindsay. Every now and then you might see one from me. I did one on our congressional candidates here in the 4th on just funding, and that was kind of a fun one. I don't write anything. These guys are the writers. So anyways, that's all we have for today, guys. I'm not going to give a disclaimer on city stuff today because we didn't talk about anything of the city. This is all school. And so this is what it is. So thank you again, Jim, for coming and joining us today. We'll have to have you on again as the year goes on, and hopefully Republicans will get you some help over there this year in Olympia. So thanks for having us, guys, and we'll talk to you soon.